Look, I'm just going to say how I feel on this particular issue. The Supreme Court has gone rogue. It's official. I mean, they've been out of touch for a long time, dating back to decisions like Buckley v. Vallejo in the 70s, and more recent examples being Bush v. Gore in 2000 and Citizens United in 2010. But now, with their decision to uphold Donald Trump's Muslim ban, which is blatantly unconstitutional, they've officially gone rogue. At this point, they're not doing their job. They're tasked with protecting and upholding the Constitution, but they're just giving Donald Trump a blank check to discriminate. They're allowing for discrimination. Now, as MSNBC's Steve Bannon puts it, a month ago, the Supreme Court sided against workers' rights in an important arbitration case. A week later, the High Court sided with Ohio Republicans on purges from state voter rolls. A week after that, the justices rejected efforts to stop partisan gerrymandering. Today, the Supreme Court sided with Donald Trump on his Muslim ban and said California's law on anti-abortion crisis pregnancy centers is likely unconstitutional. So decision after decision hasn't just been a slap in the face for Americans, but it's been an affront to the U.S. Constitution. They are out of touch. And look, the last time the Supreme Court was this out of touch, FDR threatened them with a court-packing plan. And look, their job ultimately is to interpret the U.S. Constitution, but they do need to interpret it in a way that coincides with public opinion. They can't get too out of touch with public opinion, otherwise they do lose their legitimacy. Because the court, it doesn't have an enforcement mechanism. They issue a ruling, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to abide by it. So, for example, when they passed Brown v. Board of Education, I mean, there was no enforcement mechanism. They didn't have a police force that got out and told schools they had to desegregate. So the way that the court functions is on this basis of legitimacy. So long as the public sees their rulings as constitutional and in line with public opinion to a degree, then they have legitimacy. But they've just gotten out of touch. This is public opinion, and this is where the Supreme Court should be. This is where they are in actuality. They're so out of touch with public opinion. So maybe it's time to start threatening them with another court-packing plan so they get their shit together and realize that they don't have a blank check to do whatever they want, and their job is to defend the Constitution, not Republican presidents or Democratic presidents. You interpret the Constitution, and the Constitution very clearly states that discrimination is not acceptable, but nonetheless, they're allowing for Donald Trump's Muslim ban. How ridiculously insane is that? So, for more details on the Muslim ban, we go to the New York Times, who states, in a 5-4 vote, the court's conservatives said the president's statutory power over immigration was not undermined by his history of incendiary statements about the dangers he said Muslims pose to Americans. Writing for the majority, Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr. said that Mr. Trump had ample statutory authority to make national security judgments in the realm of immigration, and he rejected a constitutional challenge to Mr. Trump's latest executive order on the matter. His third, this one issued as a proclamation in September, but the court's liberals decried the decision. In a passionate and searing dissent from the bench, Justice Sonia Sotomayor said the decision was no better than Korematsu v. United States, the 1944 decision that endorsed the detention of Japanese Americans during World War II. By upholding the travel ban, she said, the court merely replaces one gravely wrong decision with another. Justices Kennedy, Thomas, Alito, and Gorsuch joined the majority opinion. Now, the irony here is that even though this is very similar to the 1944 Korematsu decision, well, they decided to overrule that decision in this very case, which is basically their way of virtue signaling and trying to convince us that they totally care about the Constitution, even though they just declared that Trump has the power to ban people from entering this country based solely on their religious affiliation. They still care about the Constitution though, guys. But I mean, of course, they claim Trump's Muslim ban is actually different than Korematsu, when it's not, given what Donald Trump said about the issue and him referring to it as a Muslim ban. However, they state basically that they don't have to consider what Donald Trump said, because this is really just about denying foreign nationals entry, not Muslims entry. And they say this even though he explicitly said on the campaign trail, we need a complete shutdown of Muslims entering the country until we can figure out what's going on. But according to them, we don't have to take the president at his own word that it's a Muslim ban. We don't. We can just say that, this is about him denying entry to foreign nationals, even though he said it was a Muslim ban previously. So, this violates the Constitution in probably numerous ways, but I think the most glaring way it violates it is the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. You can't discriminate on the basis of religious affiliation, and I think these pro-religious liberty Republicans would want that to be the case, because if we can discriminate against Muslims, then obviously we're empowered to discriminate against Christians as well. But no, the Supreme Court is ignoring what Donald Trump said, and they are doing mental jujitsu to interpret it in a way that makes it not be a Muslim ban when it very much is a Muslim ban. They don't represent the Constitution. They represent Republicans. If you are one of the people deluded enough to think that the Supreme Court is nonpartisan, I feel sorry for you. They're not doing their job. They're not representing the Constitution. And furthermore, they recently decided to hand a victory to a bigoted baker just a few weeks ago, and now they indirectly handed another victory to another bigoted business owner. As Lydia Wheeler of The Hill reports, the Supreme Court on Monday threw out a lower court ruling that found a Washington state florist had intentionally discriminated against a same-sex couple for refusing to make flower arrangements for their wedding. The justices vacated the ruling and sent the court case back down to the Washington Supreme Court, giving the florist Baronelle Stutzman another chance to make her case in light of their decision earlier this month in favor of a Colorado baker who refused to bake a wedding cake for a same-sex marriage. Now the question is, why vacate this decision? Why not just make a ruling? Why not just establish precedent? Because they know if they truly interpreted the Constitution, where that would lead them. It would lead them to side against the bigoted baker. But the reason why they're being cowards and they're not ruling is because they know that this is unconstitutional. But in order to allow for this type of discrimination to continue, this type of brazen discrimination that's obviously homophobic, well, they would be undermining decades of precedent. So they're allowing it to go on by just not really taking a stand and setting precedent because they're cowards. Now, here's the thing. They're not just allowing private business owners to deny services to gay people that they would otherwise offer to straight couples, because they're allowing the GOP to gerrymander, even if that gerrymandering is specifically designed to disenfranchise voters of color. Now, as Jake Johnson of Common Dreams reports, in a victory for GOP, racial gerrymanders everywhere, and a significant loss for voting rights, the Supreme Court's conservative majority on Monday overturned a lower court ruling and revived electoral districts drawn by Texas Republicans that many experts say are blatantly designed to discriminate against minorities, compounding what has already been a rough several days for activists and legal experts working to combat gerrymandering nationwide. The Supreme Court also decided to send a major North Carolina partisan gerrymandering case back to a lower court, leaving intact congressional maps that rights groups argue were drawn to discriminate against Democratic voters. So, the Supreme Court has gone rogue. They're not defending the Constitution. They're just doing what Republicans want. Now, some people might make, a counter argument and say, but Mike, some of what they do is good. They decided to strike down a ban on same-sex marriage in 2015, and that's great. But I think that the fact that that decision, the Obergefell decision, was 5-4 still shows us how they're rogue, because something that is so common sense, if you study the Constitution, you'd know that marriage equality should be the law of the land. So the fact that it was that close shows that they're rogue, because it should be a no-brainer. It should be 9-0. Something so obviously unconstitutional like bans on marriage equality or a Muslim ban, it shouldn't even be up for debate. I'm sorry, it shouldn't even be up for a debate. They're not appointed to the Supreme Court to give us their opinions, but instead to interpret the Constitution. If you want political commentary, you watch shows like this. Now, after proving that they are nothing more than partisan ideologues by upholding Donald Trump's hilariously unconstitutional Muslim ban, guess what happened? They dealt another blow to unions, and now Justice Kennedy announced that he's going to be retiring, which means that what's going from a conservative majority that's going to stay the same, but it's going to be a very extremist and hardline conservative majority. So those instances on social issues, on reproductive rights, on LGBT rights, where Justice Kennedy was the swing vote, that's gone. They're now going to have the authority, if they want to overturn decades of precedent and overturn Roe v. Wade and overrule the recent victory we got with Obergefell, LGBTQ marriage. So this is what we have to look forward to now. So they don't serve you, they serve the Republican Party. And since Republicans decided to steal a Supreme Court seat from Democrats and decided to play dirty, maybe it's time our side plays dirty too. Maybe it's time we introduce a court packing plan when we get back in power. We need a new generation of Supreme Court justices that actually care about interpreting the Constitution objectively and not making sure that everything their party wants, they get.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.